Hello, I'm Fast Lawyer. Today we're going to review Ember Souls VR, a game released on the MetaQuest store on November 21st, 2024 by developer Virtual Age, and per the developers coming to Steam VR soon. It normally retails for $24.99, and that's what I paid. I tested it out on the MetaQuest 3 standalone. The developers describe Ember Souls as a thrilling VR hack and slash game blending parkour, climbing, and environmental puzzles in a luxurious Persian palace. But who are we kidding? This is really Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time translated to VR. The inspiration is very obvious when playing this game. And if you're nostalgic for Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time like me, then getting this game is a no-brainer. This is literally a childhood dream come true for me, playing this in VR. And if you're in the same boat, then I would highly recommend this game for you. However, this game is also very flawed, and if you're not a Prince of Persia fan, then I would tell you that this game is very janky. There's a lot of issues with the combat, with the parkour. It's very buggy, and there's been 2 updates to the game, 2 patches, but there's still lots of bugs in this game. This is not a smooth experience at all. So for those of you who are not big Prince of Persia fans, then I would say wait for an update that fixes the issues with this game. It's currently very rough playing this game, and you can see that from the video footage that I took. I wasn't trying to make the game look bad. There was just so many bugs. They were so prevalent that it was impossible to take a lot of footage without showing some of those bugs, some of the jankiness, and just the lack of polish overall. It shows early and often in this game, and unless you're just purposely trying to hide it, it's gonna show up if you're recording game footage of this game currently. But the good news is that you can tell there was a lot of love put into this game. I think the developers really set their goals very high for this game. They wanted to recreate Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time into VR, get the vibe, get the mood, get the basic gameplay from the classic and translate it into virtual reality. And for the most part, they did an excellent job. This does feel like Prince of Persia in VR. There are lots of epic moments in this game. Some of the parkour feels absolute fantastic, and when the combat works, it's actually pretty good. And even some of the puzzles are creative and using the environment to help you solve how to progress through the game. And you also have lots of abilities that unlock as you go through the game. There's upgrades that you can get that really change the gameplay. But I would not be doing my job as a reviewer if I didn't mention all the negatives and all the issues I faced. So for every epic moment I had, there were usually at least 2 or 3 frustrating moments that went along with that. And at times the game was laughably bad. I actually laughed at times at just the overall jankiness of the game. But the good news here is that none of the bugs or issues I faced were game breaking, and overall I still enjoyed the game despite all the jank. Ember Souls is running on the Unreal Engine. On the MetaQuest 3 standalone, I did notice some stuttering at times. You do have full locomotion as well as smooth or snap turning. You can play seated or standing, although because of all the platforming, I definitely recommend to play standing as you'll experience less jank that way. You can choose between head gaze directed camera or controller directed camera. There are 3 difficulty options: Adventurer, Warrior, or Hero. On my first playthrough, I chose Adventurer, the recommended mode, but I did regret that because that was just too easy. I want to estimate it took me about 7 hours to complete the game, and once you beat the game it does unlock raid mode, but beware, if you start a new game it will delete that option, so don't do it. I learned the hard way, unfortunately. There's also a sandbox mode available, and they promise mixed reality support coming soon. As stated earlier, this game is a mix of combat, platforming, and puzzles. I want to estimate that 40% of the game is combat, the other 40% is platforming, and then there's 20% that are puzzles and story. Combat is a mix of using melee weapons. There's one-handed and two-handed weapons. You can also use shields and ordnance. There's also a bow and arrow, and you can use some magical abilities. Now you do have a very limited amount of mana, so you cannot spam the magical abilities, but some of the magical abilities are pretty strong and will make combat feel trivial. You have potentially 3 weapons weapon slots plus a helmet that you can equip, or you can also choose to equip a shield, but I don't recommend it as they do break. You can block, you can dash, and you're just basically looking for openings at the enemies, and you can spam your attacks really fast. And yes, you can technically wiggle your sword and make damage, but it's not the most effective way to dispatch enemies. The most effective way is to look for openings, especially areas where the enemy doesn't have armor, and if you swing really hard, you can usually take heads off or limbs off, and it's pretty fun. I personally did not like two-handed weapons in this game. I always felt that one-handed swords were the best, and I think double blades is really the way to go. Throwing daggers was pretty fun though. Combat was a mixed bag because the enemy AI wasn't always the best. There's this grenade throwing enemy that usually team killed their own team pretty constantly, and there were also attacks that either phased through the enemy or phased through me. Sometimes it was hard to tell exactly what had happened, but the enemy was dead. The platforming was absolutely thrilling at times. You could run, jump, climb, jump between platforms, zip line through locations, climb up, go down quickly on a rope, grab a banner and quickly go down. There were lots of combinations that you can pull off that really makes this a lot of fun when it works. And there's obstacle courses that are just diabolical, whether it's chainsaws, flames going out, platforms that need to be timed correctly, or you'll fall to your death. And you'll even have to figure out some of these obstacle courses by using your special abilities in order to be able to progress. But the problem, once again, is the jank, lack of polish. You'll see from the video that I fell through the map. There were times where I thought I had a grip on an object and it just failed and I fell down. There were times where I just never reached the object that I was supposed to reach, or grabbed a different object than what I intended. I was constantly getting my sword instead of the platform. There is a setting though to turn that off, and I highly recommend that you do that. There's also a few puzzles thrown in there. None of the puzzles were that difficult. I would say they're casual level difficulty, but I did like how they were intertwined with the environment, so that made the puzzles kind of fun to solve. There's also a little bit of story here. Honestly, the voice acting was pretty bad and the story was kind of forgettable, but at least an attempt was made, and some of the parts were pretty funny, you know, in a kind of it's so bad it's good kind of way. I thought the visuals were pretty good for a VR Quest standalone title. I wouldn't say it's the best looking Quest 3 title, but it's pretty good overall. The map is pretty huge and there's different looking areas within the palace. The character models and animations could have been a little bit more varied though. The boss fights though did feel epic, and each of them were different with different mechanics, and I really appreciated that the game did that. The boss fights were very different than the mob fights. I did overall enjoy the exploration of this palace. The game sounds were laughably bad at times, but the game soundtrack was okay. I do want to mention one last issue that I had with the game, and that is the overall locomotion. For whatever reason, the movement just never felt smooth enough like it should for a platformer. For example, the sprint would stop and start on its own, and I could never figure out why. Sometimes it felt like you were walking in quicksand. All these issues accumulate and make the overall game experience less than stellar. So if I have to rate Ember Souls, I would give it a 6.5 out of 10. I've got to give kudos to the developers for aiming high, but just their execution is not there. Hopefully with patches this game is better in the future.